For a few months now, everybody watching enjoyed a pretty steady downward trend at the gas pump. But if you've had to fill up over the past few days, you already know that that has turned around pretty quickly, despite the fact that nationally there has been no increase compared to a week ago. So take a look at the Gas Buddy chart for the last 3 months. The blue line is the national average. The red one is for the Buffalo area. Ever since the end of September, we've actually been lower than the rest of the country in terms of the average, almost 30 cents cheaper at one point. But we started climbing back up at the end of last month, and we're now around $3.72 a gallon, basically right on par with the national average, which is a lot cheaper than it was a few weeks ago. Who better to help us understand this than Patrick Haan, head of petroleum analysis for GasBuddy.com. Always appreciate you coming on our town hall, and I want to talk to you about that trend that we're seeing here in Western New York. What's driving the spike in prices that we're seeing here for about a week and a half now? As we compare what's happening here to the rest of the country, people wondering what's up.
Well, certainly a lot is going on both with gasoline and diesel prices. The Northeast market has been extremely tight this year. Over the last few years, we've lost a few major refineries in the Northeast, including New York and New England as well. A major shutdown after an explosion in 2019 took out a major refinery in Philadelphia, the PES refinery, as well as COVID, taking out a refinery north of the border in Canada that supplied fuel into the Northeast as well. And with the absence of those refineries, it's been less about the price of oil, which is high and a contributing factor, but more about a lack of an ability to turn that oil into things like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. And so we've seen tremendous price increases here over the last couple of weeks. Nowhere have the increases been as substantial as the Northeast, including New York as well. Gas prices on the rise again as supplies tighten, and especially true for diesel fuel. Prices remain very high as diesel inventories remain extremely tight.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about diesel in just a moment, but sticking with gas prices here and the issues that we're seeing at refineries, any reason to believe that will improve here in the Northeast in the short term, or is this a trend that we should expect to see here in Western New York?
Well, it's probably going to be a volatile next month or two, really contingent on economic activity, essentially demand. If the economy slows down, demand will too. That could buy us some breathing room. The good news is that a refinery did come back online that had been sitting idle since COVID. That refinery, relatively small, about 100,000 barrels a day in New Jersey, that could provide some relief to the region. But overall, I don't expect this to improve significantly for perhaps some time. It's going to take refineries a lot of time to get back on the right side of things. And with maintenance happening at refineries in the region now, there's very little margin for error. So bottom line, I don't expect it to be very good when it comes to gas prices. I'm hopeful that we won't be able to see prices go over $4 in Buffalo this winter for gasoline. We could. The big concern is diesel, which could continue to eclipse $5. And it's not impossible that as heating oil consumption starts to go up, diesel prices could continue to go up through the winter.
Yeah, on that issue of diesel prices, you're hearing across the country in some media reports of the word shortage. Is it really a shortage of diesel, or is it just that, this traditional supply and demand thing is out of sync a little bit?
Well, it is. It's extremely tight. There's a metric that the industry uses, that oil analysts like myself use, a metric that looks at the balance of supply and demand and comes up with basically a number of days of supply. If every refinery stopped operating, that's a useful number, or it's a useful number because if you look at it on a week-by-week basis, it changes very small numbers every week. It had dropped as low as 25.4 days. It went up to 25.9 last week, and this week it dropped a little bit to 25.8. But that's a balance of supply and demand. What that number tells us is when it gets low, that refiners aren't able to keep up with demand. And when that number, that days of supply number, goes up, as we saw last week, that tells us that refiners were able to make a little headwind and that supply exceeded demand that week. So I wouldn't say we're at imminent threat of widespread disruptions or outages, but the situation is very tight, and you could see some stations, at least for maybe 12 to 24 hours, running low on diesel. But again, this is not maybe the word, or the shortage is not the word I would maybe use at this point, but things are extremely tight.
Finally, Patrick, when we look toward solutions for this, I mean, so much of the conversation has to do with oil prices, right? And we all say we need to drill more, we need to do more of that in this country. But if you're telling us the price pressure right now is due to refining capacity, how do we fix that? What does the government do? Do we make it easier to get some of the permits and that sort of thing? I mean, or is it just that's not going to get a whole lot better in the short term?
Well, I think the administration has made some mistakes on attacking the oil sector, not realizing that the Russia war in Ukraine would really change the game and put a lot more pressure on oil that's coming into the Northeast, which in some cases now is being diverted over to Europe because of the war in Ukraine. The administration could embrace refining for a short term, even if it wants to move to cleaner alternatives down the road. Those alternatives aren't necessarily ready for the mass yet. So in the next couple of years, we're going to continue to deal with refining capacity that's very tight. We do have additional refining capacity coming online, but it's in the Gulf Coast. It's not a whole lot. There is more refining capacity being added overseas, but again, putting more reliance on those countries to produce, countries like China and the Middle East as well, which haven't been the most stable, at least relationships with the U.S. So the administration could incentivize refiners to either bring back idled facilities or potentially reverse its very anti-oil sector and refining stance. That may help.
Patrick Haan with GasBuddy.com. Always appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.